You ever work late shifts and decide to swing by Walmart at 2 a.m. to grab something mundane? Milk, snacks, maybe some batteries? Yeah, that's what I was doing. Nothing dramatic. Just a quick errand on a Thursday night, or rather early Friday morning. The place was nearly deserted, as expected. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above rows and rows of neatly stacked products. A few straggling customers wandered aimlessly like zombies, but otherwise it was just me. A teenage cashier scrolling on her phone at the front, and some guy mopping near the pharmacy. I headed to aisle 13. Weirdly enough, it was the one spot in the store where the lights flickered a little too much for comfort. You know, the kind of flicker that makes shadows jump in ways they shouldn't. But hey, it was Walmart. Half the stuff in there is janky anyway. I was halfway down the aisle when I heard it. A sound. Faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. It wasn't the usual hum of the store or the far-off beep of a register. This was breathing. At first, I thought maybe someone was on the other side of the shelf, hidden by the towering stacks of cereal boxes and jars of peanut butter. But when I leaned closer, all I found was silence. That's when the smell hit me. It was metallic, sharp, like blood, but mixed with something foul like old meat left to rot. My stomach churned as I instinctively backed away, my sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. And then the breathing started again. This time it was louder, clearer. It was coming from somewhere above me. I slowly tilted my head up, heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. And there, wedged between the beams of the shelves, was something. I didn't get a good look at it right away, but what I could see was horrifying enough. Pale, sinewy limbs. A face, or what should have been a face, pressed against the shadows. The thing crouched impossibly high up in the rafters, staring down at me with hollow, gleaming eyes. It didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. My body froze as an unnatural grin spread across its face, revealing rows of jagged, yellow teeth. It let out this guttural, rasping laugh, like nails dragging down a chalkboard, and before I could even process what was happening, it dropped. I don't even remember how I moved. I just ran, sprinting down the aisle like my life depended on it, because it did. My shoes skidded against the floor as I hit the corner, nearly knocking over a display of discount DVDs. Behind me, I heard it, the sound of something wet and heavy slapping against the tiles. It wasn't walking, it was crawling fast. I made the mistake of glancing back. The thing was on all fours, its pale limbs bending in unnatural angles as it pursued me. Its head was cocked sideways, almost upside down, and its mouth hung open, drooling something dark and viscous onto the floor. The grin was gone now, replaced by an expression that could only be described as hunger. I bolted past the toy aisle, rounding the corner to the electronics section, where the TVs were still on display. Every screen showed the same stock footage of a beach at sunset, except one. On the far right TV, instead of waves and seagulls, I saw myself. Not a reflection. Me, running, in real time, but the screen wasn't showing the electronics section. It was showing aisle 13, the exact aisle I just left. In the footage, I was running toward the camera just like I was now. But behind me, there was nothing. No creature. No crawling monstrosity. Just an empty, flickering aisle. What the hell? I muttered, my voice shaking as I stared at the screen. My chest was heaving, and every nerve in my body screamed to keep moving, but I couldn't look away. The TV version of me stumbled, tripping over something invisible, and hit the floor hard. The camera zoomed in unnaturally fast, focusing on my terrified face as something dark crept into the frame behind me. Not the thing that was chasing me, something else. This shadowy mass, impossibly black, poured into the screen like smoke, and then two glowing, yellow eyes pierced through it. That's when all the TVs flickered and went black, and the store went silent. It was so quiet, I could hear my own ragged breaths echoing in the aisles. No buzzing lights, no distant hum of the registers. Even the usual Walmart radio, those cheery announcements about rollbacks and deals, had stopped. I wasn't sure which was worse, the silence or the sudden absence of the crawling thing. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. Is anyone here? No response. Then faintly I heard a sound. A steady, rhythmic tapping like fingernails against metal. It was coming from the ceiling. I looked up again, this time fully expecting to see that grinning thing from before. But what I saw was worse. Far worse. The ceiling wasn't there anymore. Above me stretched a void of endless darkness, dotted with faint, swirling shapes, like distant galaxies spinning in slow motion. And in the center of it all, suspended in the air, was the creature. Only now it was different, bigger. Its limbs were longer, stretched grotesquely as it dangled from something unseen. Its face, God, its face, wasn't human anymore. The grin had returned, but it was impossibly wide, splitting its entire head in two. And those hollow eyes weren't hollow anymore. They were filled with flickering static, like TV static, as if it were broadcasting something incomprehensible. It tilted its head at me, the grin twitching, and then it spoke. Not with words, not out loud, but in my head. You saw me? It whispered, its voice like static and screams layered together. Now you're mine. I didn't wait to figure out what the hell it meant. Whatever this thing was, whatever it wanted, I wasn't sticking around to let it claim me. My legs were moving before I even realized it, sprinting past aisles of cheap clothes, plastic toys, and shelves of clearance food. The tapping followed me, but now it wasn't just above me. It was everywhere. Every surface echoed with the sound. Metal shelves, linoleum floors. Even the air itself seemed to hum with the rhythm of those claw-like taps. I ran toward the front of the store, where the teenage cashier had been stationed earlier. I prayed she was still there, scrolling TikTok or whatever. But as I skidded around the corner, my heart dropped. The checkout lanes were empty. Not just empty of people. Empty as in gone. The registers, the conveyor belts, even the bags of impulse buy snacks. All of it had vanished. In their place was an expanse of black nothingness that stretched endlessly beyond the automatic doors. No, 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 I whispered, stumbling back. My chest heaved as I turned around, desperately looking for another way out. The store had changed. The aisles were no longer straight and orderly. They twisted and spiraled like a maze, overlapping and looping in ways that shouldn't have been physically possible. Some shelves stretched upward into that impossible void above, while others slanted into the ground at bizarre angles. And through it all, that tapping grew louder, faster, closer. Come on, think, I muttered, gripping the sides of my head as I tried to calm my racing thoughts. There had to be a way out. There was always a way out. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something move, a flash of color in the distance. Hey, I shouted, taking off toward it. Help, please. I rounded the corner and froze. It was the teenage cashier. She stood at the end of the aisle, still scrolling on her phone like nothing was wrong. But her back was to me, and something about the way she stood, too stiff, too still, set every alarm in my body off. Miss, I called out, my voice cracking. Are you okay? Slowly, she turned to face me. Her phone was gone now, her hands hanging limply at her sides. Her head tilted unnaturally to one side, like her neck had been snapped halfway around, and her eyes were glowing with that same static I'd seen in the creatures. You shouldn't have looked, she said, her voice eerily calm. It wasn't her voice, though. It was layered with something else, something deeper and wrong. Then she smiled. It wasn't a human smile. It was the same split, jagged grin the creature had worn, stretching impossibly wide across her face. Before I could react, she lunged at me. I dove to the side just in time, her outstretched hands narrowly missing my neck. She hit the ground with a sickening thud but twisted her body unnaturally, like she didn't have bones, and sprang back up. I didn't wait for round two. I turned and bolted, weaving through the warped aisles as fast as I could. My lungs burned, and every muscle in my body screamed for me to stop, but I couldn't. The tapping was everywhere now, mingled with the sound of her footsteps chasing me. And then I heard it again. The voice. You can't run forever. It hissed, echoing inside my skull. This place, it's mine. And now, so are you. No! I screamed, slamming into a random door at the back of the store. It swung open, and I stumbled into a cold, metallic hallway lined with flickering fluorescent lights. It wasn't part of Walmart. At least, not any Walmart I'd ever seen. The walls were covered in strange, spidery writing that pulsed faintly, like veins filled with glowing ink. The air was freezing, and the faint smell of ozone stung my nostrils. Behind me, the door slammed shut, and I heard the lock click into place. I was alone. For now. The hallway stretched endlessly, or at least it felt that way. My breath came in short gasps as I moved forward, the cold seeping through my clothes and into my bones. The walls seemed to shift as I passed, the strange symbols pulsing faintly, as if they were alive. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting that thing, or the cashier or something worse, to burst through the door behind me. But the hallway stayed eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of the flickering lights overhead. I don't know how long I walked before I reached the end. There was no door, no sign, just a massive, gaping hole in the wall. A perfect circle, edges rimmed with more of that glowing, spidery script. Beyond it was pure blackness. I stood there, staring into the void, my mind screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't. The voice was back, whispering in my head, soft and almost playful. Come closer, it urged. You've come this far. You want to know, don't you? What I am. Why you're here. I wanted to ignore it, to turn around, find another way out, escape this nightmare. But something about the voice, its pull, was irresistible. I stepped through the hole. The darkness swallowed me whole. For a moment, I couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't even feel the ground beneath my feet. It was like floating in an endless void, weightless and utterly alone. Then the lights came on. Not fluorescent lights like in the store, but something harsher, colder. They flickered to life all around me, revealing a massive, circular chamber that looked like it had been carved out of stone. The walls were covered in the same glowing symbols, but these were larger, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. And in the center of the room, suspended above the floor, was it. The creature. But it wasn't just the thing that had chased me through the store. It was bigger now, its body shifting and warping, made of shadows and static. Its eyes burned like twin suns, and its grin stretched impossibly wide, splitting its face into something almost serpentine. It spoke again, but this time, the voice wasn't just in my head. It echoed through the chamber, vibrating in my chest. Welcome to my domain, it said, its grin widening further. You've seen me. Now you're part of me. I backed away, my heart pounding as I searched for an exit, but there was none. The hole I'd stepped through was gone, replaced by smooth, impenetrable stone. What do you want? I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. The creature laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. I want everything, it said. Every thought, every memory, every piece of you. I want to feed. And then it moved. It didn't crawl or slither this time. It didn't even walk. It just was, one moment hovering in the center of the room, the next looming over me, its grin inches from my face. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Its hands, or what passed for hands, reached for me, long, spindly fingers crackling with energy. I felt them brush against my forehead, and a wave of icy pain shot through my skull. Images flashed before my eyes. Memories. My childhood, my family, moments I hadn't thought about in years. They flickered like an old film reel, faster and faster, until they blurred together into a chaotic mess. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. I was on the floor, gasping for air, my head pounding. The creature hovered above me, its grin fading slightly. You're stronger than I thought, it said, almost amused. Most break by now. I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't let it do whatever it was trying to do. I forced myself to my feet, legs shaking beneath me, and glared at the creature. You're not getting me, I said through gritted teeth. His grin returned. Brave. Foolish, but brave. That's when I saw it. Behind the creature, near the center of the chamber, was something I hadn't noticed before. A faint glimmer of light, like a doorway. My only way out. I didn't think. I just ran. The creature roared, a sound that shook the entire chamber, and lunged after me. Its shadowy form stretched and twisted, trying to block my path, but I ducked and weaved, narrowly avoiding its grasp. The light grew brighter as I got closer, blindingly so, until I couldn't see anything else. I leapt into it, feeling the creature's claws brush against my back as I did. When I opened my eyes, I was back. The Walmart was normal again. The aisles were straight, the shelves were intact, and the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. I was lying on the floor of aisle 13, staring up at the ceiling. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, but then I noticed the faint, spidery symbols etched into the shelf beside me, glowing softly before fading away. And in the distance, just barely audible, I heard it. The tapping. I stumbled to my feet, legs shaking so badly I almost fell again. My head was pounding, and my breath came in short, shallow bursts. The store looked normal now, eerily normal. Bright fluorescent lights, neat rows of products, faint music playing over the speakers. But I knew better. I wasn't alone. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the thing lurking in the shadows of aisle 13. But the aisle was empty. Still, the air felt heavy, oppressive, like something was watching me. I needed to get out. Without thinking, I bolted toward the front of the store. The registers were back where they should have been, and so was the teenage cashier. She was sitting on her stool, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. But something was off. Her movements were too smooth, too robotic. She didn't glance up as I approached, not even when I tripped over one of those impulse buy bins filled with discounted DVDs. "Hey," I said, my voice shaking. "I need help. There's something?" She looked up then, and my blood turned to ice. Her eyes, they were filled with static, just like before. The grin spread across her face slowly, unnaturally, stretching wider and wider until it split her cheeks. Her head tilted to one side with a sickening crack, and she whispered in that layered, distorted voice, "You shouldn't have looked." I backed away, my heart pounding as she stood up, moving jerkily like a puppet on strings. Her static-filled eyes locked onto mine, and she began to step toward me. "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "No, no, no." I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air hitting me like a slap to the face. I half expected the parking lot to be gone, replaced by that endless void from before, but it wasn't. It was normal. Cars were parked neatly in rows, and a few other customers were loading their trunks. It was almost comforting, almost. I sprinted to my car, fumbling with my keys as I glanced over my shoulder. The cashier was standing just inside the store, her silhouette barely visible through the glass doors. She wasn't moving, just watching. Finally, I managed to unlock the door and threw myself inside. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the parking lot without looking back. A warning left behind, I didn't go home right away. Couldn't. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel, and my mind was racing with questions I couldn't answer. What the hell had I seen? What was that thing? Why had it singled me out? And most importantly, was it really over? I pulled into an all-night diner a few miles away, needing somewhere, anywhere that felt safe. The place was quiet, with just a few truckers scattered around the booths. I sat at the counter, ordered a coffee I didn't drink, and stared blankly at the table. That's when I noticed it. On the napkin dispenser, someone had scratched something into the metal. For words, etched deeply, as if by a knife. "It never really ends." My stomach dropped, and I felt the air around me grow cold. I turned my head slowly, scanning the diner, half expecting to see the creature, or the cashier, or worse, lurking in the shadows. But everything was normal, almost. In the corner of the diner, one of the truckers was sitting perfectly still, his face obscured by shadows. As I watched, he tilted his head toward me, and for the briefest moment, I saw it. A grin, white, jagged, and then Just as quickly as I saw it, it was gone. The aftermath, I've never been back to Walmart. Hell, I barely leave my house at night anymore. But the thing is, it doesn't matter. The tapping hasn't stopped. Sometimes, late at night, I hear it coming from the walls, or the ceiling, or, worst of all, from the closet in my bedroom. And every time I see that grin, waiting, watching, because the thing was right. It never really ends. It's been weeks now. Weeks since that night at Walmart. Weeks of trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that I'd hallucinated the whole thing, that maybe I'd fallen asleep in my car and dreamed it all. But then there's the tapping. It started faint, just a soft, irregular noise in the walls, like something shifting in the pipes. I ignored it at first, convincing myself it was the old plumbing or maybe rats in the crawl space. But it's not in the pipes, and it's not rats. The tapping knows where I am. It follows me from room to room, growing louder when I sit still too long. Sometimes it's overhead, in the ceiling. Other times it's behind me, in the walls. And once, just once, I swear I heard it coming from the mirror. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination. Until last night. I was in bed, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. The tapping had been especially bad that day, following me from the kitchen to the living room and then into the bathroom. It had even started mimicking my movements, tapping faster when I walked and slowing when I stopped. By the time I crawled into bed, I was exhausted but too wired to sleep. Every sound, every creak of the house, made my heart race. And then it started again. Tap, tap, tap. But this time it wasn't in the walls. It was coming from the closet. I froze, pulling the blanket up to my chin like a child. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like fingernails raking against the wooden door. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real. "You're imagining it," I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. "It's not real." But then the door creaked. It wasn't loud, just a faint, almost imperceptible groan of wood shifting. But it was enough to make my blood run cold. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but lie there frozen in terror. But my body wouldn't move. The door creaked again, opening just a crack. And then I saw it. A single, pale finger, impossibly long and thin, curled around the edge of the door, tapped once against the wood. Tap. Then the door began to open wider. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember running. The next thing I knew, I was outside, standing barefoot in the middle of my driveway. The cold night air bit at my skin, but I didn't care. The house was silent. No tapping, no creaking, nothing. But I couldn't go back inside. I sat in my car until the sun came up, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands and staring at the front door, half expecting that thing to come crawling out after me. Didn't. But that doesn't mean it's gone. Nowhere is safe. I've tried staying in hotels. I've tried crashing on friends' couches. Hell, I even slept in my car a few nights, thinking that if I kept moving, it wouldn't be able to find me. But it always does. No matter where I go, the tapping starts again. Sometimes it's faint, a distant sound that makes me question if I'm imagining it. Other times, it's right there, loud and insistent, like it's reminding me that I'll never escape. And sometimes I see it, not fully, never fully, just flashes, a shadow flickering in the corner of my eye, a glimpse of that jagged grin in a window's reflection, the faint sound of laughter, distorted and static-filled, echoing in the back of my mind. I've stopped telling people about it. The few I confided in gave me the same look, pity mixed with fear, like they were afraid whatever was happening to me might spread to them. I don't blame them, because deep down I know the truth. The final grin last night, I saw it again. I was lying in bed, too exhausted to care about the tapping. I figured if it wanted me, it would have taken me by now. Maybe it was just messing with me, feeding off my fear. But then the tapping stopped. For the first time in weeks, the house was silent. Too silent. I sat up, heart pounding, and glanced around the room. The shadows seemed darker, deeper, like they were pressing in on me. And then I heard it, not tapping this time, breathing, slow and raspy, coming from the foot of the bed. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at me to lie back down, pull the blanket over my head, and pretend I didn't hear it. But I couldn't stop myself. I turned my head slowly, and there it was, the creature. It was crouched at the foot of my bed, its pale, twisted limbs splayed out like a spider. Its face was inches from mine, that impossibly wide grin splitting its head in two. Its eyes burned with static, and as it stared at me, I heard the voice again. "You can't run," it whispered, the words sinking into my mind like icy needles. "You're mine now, forever." And then it laughed. The end of the beginning. I don't know how I'm still alive. Maybe it's toying with me, dragging this out for its own sick amusement. Or maybe it's waiting for something, some moment when I let my guard down completely. But one thing's for sure, the tapping hasn't stopped, and neither has the grin. I don't know how I made it through last night. I sat in the corner of my room, gripping a baseball bat like it would do any good against that. The thing didn't move. It stayed at the edge of my bed, grinning, its static-filled eyes boring into me. But as the hours ticked by, something changed. The grin began to twitch, like it was struggling to hold its shape. Its head tilted sharply, first to one side, then the other, as if it were frustrated. And that's when it hit me. The thing didn't want to just kill me. That would have been easy. It wanted my fear. It had been feeding on it this whole time, growing stronger every time I froze, every time I ran, every time I let it control me. If I wanted to survive, I couldn't let it win. Couldn't let it scare me anymore. The showdown. I stood up, gripping the bat tightly in my hands. My legs were shaking, my breath coming in shallow gasps, but I forced myself to meet its gaze. "You're not real," I said, my voice trembling. The grin twitched again. "You're just some thing, some parasite that gets off on fear. But you can't hurt me. Not unless I let you." Its grin faltered for the first time, just slightly, but enough to make my pulse quicken. It growled, a low, guttural sound that reverberated through the room, and lunged at me. I didn't back down. Swinging the bat with every ounce of strength I had, I slammed it into the creature's head. The bat didn't connect with flesh or bone. It passed through the thing like smoke, but it hurt. It screamed, a horrible, high-pitched sound like static and nails on a chalkboard. This form flickered, distorting like a bad signal on an old TV. "Get out!" I screamed, swinging again. "You don't own me." The creature reeled back, its grin completely gone now. The static in its eyes dimmed, and its body began to collapse in on itself, shrinking and twisting until it was nothing more than a dark, shapeless mass. With one final, ear-splitting screech, it disappeared. The aftermath, the silence that followed, was deafening. I stood there, trembling, the bat still clenched in my hands. The room was normal again. No strange symbols on the walls, no tapping, no voids of endless darkness. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the spot where the creature had been. But it didn't come back. Not that night. Not the next. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, I started to believe it was really gone. But it's never really over. I moved out of that house. Got rid of everything that reminded me of what happened. Started fresh in a new city, far away from that Walmart, that store, that nightmare. But every so often, when the house is quiet and the lights are off, I hear it. Faint tap, just once. It's always enough to remind me, it's still out there, watching, waiting. And when the time is right, I know it'll try again. But now I'm ready, because the thing that tried to break me doesn't understand one crucial fact. You can only be afraid for so long. And fear cuts both ways.